So higher rates can be a benefit to your buyer. Now this applies to what's happening in the marketplace right now that presents an opportunity. So higher interest rates. A lot of people think that's a negative. But for right now, in this small window of opportunity, I think they can be your friend. They can actually provide an opportunity. So let's get right into the presentation. So what drives mortgage rates is inflation, and inflation is starting to come down. That's a main driver of mortgage rates. Now, while it's certainly not in a straight line, and while it certainly perhaps isn't come down as quickly as we would like, eventually inflation will continue lower, and that will move mortgage rates to more attractive levels. Now, what's the holdup here? Well, shelter costs, they lag. Let's take a look at what's happening with shelter costs right now. And this is measured by rents and owner's equivalent rents. Those are the predominant drivers in shelter components. Now, as you can see, the cost of rent and owner's equivalent rent have gone up dramatically. But after peaking in early 2022, they've eased up significantly. And now the year-over-year rate is 3%. The problem with this is that when we look at the way that it's measured, it counts the last 12 months. And what's even worse than that, although you may have to go back 10, 11, 12 months when the survey occurred, it's quite possible that they may have signed their lease before that. So this may have been the rent that they're paying effectively, but it may be reflective of where they signed the lease. So you really have this long lag period, and it could be a year, year and a half in lag for this to catch up. So while we know in real time, and eventually there will be a catch up, we see the cost of shelter easing the way it's reported in the CPI, especially core CPI, which is going to drive the direction of mortgage. Again, we know that there's a lag in the front of a roller coaster. When it reaches the apex of the roller coaster, it could be heading lower, but the back of the same roller coaster is still pointing up. That's kind of like the way shelter costs are behaving compared to where it's being reported in the CPI. And here's where it is, by the way, reported in the CPI. As you can see, the blue line here is how it's reflected in the CPI, and it's still reflecting a lot of pressure for shelter costs, and that's artificially pushing up the CPI. Shelter makes up 43% of the CPI, so it's a very, very big weighting, and the difference can be calculated between the two of them by 4.9%. When you take into consideration the weighting, it's actually pushing CPI up about 2% higher than it should be. So CPI right now is around 5.5% on core CPI. It really, if it were taking a real-time read on shelter costs, would be 3.5. So the point being is that eventually this does catch up. And eventually we see the CPI core move lower, and that should help mortgage rates move to significantly lower levels. Now, meanwhile, if you have a lower mortgage rates, what will that do to the housing market? Well, this next slide illustrates home inventory in the current marketplace is really tight. A lot of people like to talk about bubble conditions. So when you take a look at when we were in the housing bubble, certainly it was problematic because there were just too many homes and not enough buyers. When you look at the amount of homes available in 2007, there were 4 million units for sale. Today, that's less than 1 million. And at the same time, our population has grown. I think the bottom line here is that if rates do drop and you see an increase in buyer activity, you're going to be looking at extremely tight inventory, and that spells multiple offers and upside pricing pressure. But even with 980,000 units in home inventory, that's currently reported, what's not shown is that 40% of those are currently under contract. So they're off the market. You really can't buy those when you take active listings. What we can pick and choose from is only about 578,000. Again, so our population is growing. It's near 340 million people, and yet active listings to choose from are just 578,000. That's slim pickings. So if you can increase buyer activity through lower interest rates, guess what's going to happen? As inflation comes down, there's going to be a lot of upside pressure. So take a look just from a comparative point of view. This is what active listings look like now, and this represents a more normal marketplace. Certainly, real estate values had gone up during this period, but they really accelerated when there was low inventory. Here we are again, low inventory, and now we don't expect a 3% mortgage environment, but somewhere in the 5% mortgages should crank up demand quite a bit, and in a very slow supply environment. So look, we've seen home values increase for over 10 years consecutively, 121 straight months of home values moving up. But in the second half of 2022, they've come down modestly. So it depends on the measurement as how you look at it. But if you look at FHFA, they've come down 1%. If you look at Case-Shiller Home Price Index, it's 2.7%. Now those are on a seasonally adjusted basis because the end of the year usually has a softer levels of appreciation, even prices coming down a bit. But on a year-over-year basis, home values are still going up. Now, if rates do not reach a level that they start coming down, well, home values won't be coming down any longer. They'll start going up. So there will be a bottom in the very near future. Now, let's assume none of us are good enough to pick the exact date of the bottom and be resigned to the fact that we're going to miss it. So what do most people do? They wait until the bottom occurs. They wait until there's an all clear. They wait till prices start going up, and then they jump back in because it appears safe to do so. The problem with that is that now the sellers are more confident. There's more competition. There's multiple offers again. So you're just not going to get that good of a deal. The trick is to see the future before it becomes obvious. So if we realize that mortgage rates will drive demand in a very tight supply environment like we have now, well, then as inflation comes down, mortgage rates should come down. And what we want to do is take advantage of this time when there's a little bit of fear and a little bit of weakness in housing and enter the market before the bottom because sellers are more fearful. They'll be willing to give you a discount. There's less competition. Even though the market is scarce with inventory, it does afford more choices than after the bottom when most people enter. So this is the ideal time. And let's take a look at a case study. Now, if we looked at a case study at the last time we hit a market bottom, during that cycle, you could see prices were coming down and bottomed down early in 2012 before starting to move higher. But notice that the acceleration up was much greater once the bottom was hit, because once people started to enter, it really drove prices higher. In fact, in the next year from the bottom, prices went up 8%, 8% in 1 year. That's pretty robust. But inventory levels at the time in 2012 were at 2.4 million in inventory. And that's right now where we are during this market bottom. It's less than 1 million so far, fewer homes that are available. So do we get a similar level of gain? Do we get a greater level of gain? It's very difficult to forecast, but I think it's safe to say that prices will be supportive. And even with 2.4 million homes in inventory, we saw 8% appreciation in the next year. Let's be very conservative and say we only get 3%. Okay, so not the 8%, not more than 8 because there's less inventory, maybe not even 5%. So let's just say it's 3%. If you have a home value of $500,000, let's just say we're talking about a mortgage of $400,000 for some easy round numbers. Now, rates are elevated, but rates are about 1% higher than where they were recently. So that's costing people a little bit more money, and it's keeping people a little more bashful and at bay. So the monthly payment increase based on that 1% on a $400,000 mortgage is about $250 a month or so. Now, if it were over a year, you take that times 12, and that's a little over $3,000. So that would be the cost of the higher mortgage rate. But hold on a second right now, because we are in an environment where sellers are more concerned, maybe willing to negotiate a little bit more, a lot of negativity in the media. You could probably get a discount. Maybe it's more than 2%, maybe it's around 2%. Again, Case-Shiller says 2.7, FHFA says it's 1%. So let's just pick 2% as a discount on a $500,000 home. That's $10,000 in savings. Certainly there's ways to be creative and to get more value if you use it towards a seller contribution towards buy down or temporary or permanent. So there can be ways to actually make this more valuable. But let's just take the 10,000 in savings now as we hit bottom in the very near future and values start going up. Now remember, I showed you the last cycle bottom. It went up 8%. Well, let's only say it goes up just by 3. So instead of getting a 2% discount, you get a 3% increase while you add the two together and then subtract from that the cost of paying that higher 1% mortgage, and let's even throw in the cost of a refinance. So let's just for round numbers, because it's just going to be less than a year, right? So some round numbers here. If there's a $5,000 cost, your $10,000 savings, and $15,000 appreciation, that's $25,000. The $5,000 cost seems like a pretty good opportunity that exists in housing right now. But the trick is to see the opportunity and see the future before it becomes obvious. That's what you're here to help your clients see.